I'm really excited to dive into this talk today. By way of background, I'll talk a little bit about some of the technology we're working on at Crossbeam, but 95% of this talk is actually about other stuff. It's largely driven by kind of a set of observations and some thinking about the way in which the technology markets in and around partnerships have matured and evolved over the course of the last several years. And a lot of those observations come from firsthand experience, either working directly with partner programs in large enterprises and in startups, or kind of taking more of the macro kind of investor point of view around what's going on in the spaces surrounding partnerships. But the best way to dive into this subject is to drop a little scenario on all of you, which is not a super fun one. It's when the clicker doesn't work. Hey, there we go. All right, great. It's even worse than the clicker not working. You've just been arrested. You've just been arrested for bank robbery. And this is bad news. You had an accomplice. Your accomplice's name was Richard. And the police have taken you in, and they have put you and Richard into different rooms. And they are questioning you at the exact same time. And this puts a lot of really scary thoughts in your head. What is Richard telling the police? What should I say to the police? And even more complicated is that there are some really specific scenarios that can unfold depending on what you do. Do you stay silent and kind of collaborate with Richard in not turning each other in? Or do you defect? And do you turn Richard in and have him put away? And based on what you do, you end up in one of these squares in this matrix. If you're both able to stay silent and you protect each other, each of you are going to go to jail for a lesser charge, 2 years apiece. If you both defect and you basically turn each other in, you're both going to go to jail for 8 years. So a total of 16, the worst possible outcome. And if one of you stays silent, and the other one is the one that defects, then whoever defects is going to walk away scot-free. They'll get a deal, but they're going to send their accomplice to jail for 10 years. So what do you do here? This is actually a really, really tough situation. You're in the absence of information that you need to know what to do. And this is such an interesting problem that it really has been discussed on college campuses in game theory classes since the 1950s. And there is a quote-unquote right answer to the question. This guy knows it. If you don't recognize him, you might recognize this guy, which is the same exact person. It is John Nash, the guy portrayed in A Beautiful Mind by Russell Crowe. And the prisoner's dilemma was one of the big problems that Nash studied when thinking about this concept of the Nash equilibrium, which is kind of, if not the right answer to a game theory question, it's the answer that ends up happening in the real world when you look at it from a rational point of view. And here's the really scary thing. When you play the prisoner's dilemma game and you behave rationally, what always happens, both in an academic sense and when they put people in a laboratory and have them actually play, is that both sides defect. And here's why. No matter what you are doing, and no matter what your partner does, you're always better off defecting. So if your partner has decided to stay silent and you act selfishly, you can go from 2 years to 0 years. All you need to do is defect. And if your partner decides to turn you in, then defecting is the obvious choice because you go from 10 years, the risk of 10 years, to 8. And yet somehow the right answer to the question, the Nash equilibrium, is the worst possible outcome for both of the people involved in aggregate, a total of 16 years of time spent behind bars. And this is kind of rough. You may be asking at this point, what does this have to do with new partnership technology and the impact that partnership tech has on all the jobs that we do? Well, the reality is that day in and day out, partners are actually constantly faced with a nearly identical problem. It's the partnerships dilemma. Because we exist in a world where we need to collaborate with each other. But collaboration in an open environment requires revealing data. It requires trying to be much more transparent in the way in which we work with each other. And you end up in this same exact situation where you can decide to either have data secrecy and keep it to yourself, that's kind of the defection mode, or you can actually collaborate and you can openly share data. And in that world, if both collaborate, you may find this beautiful new path to partner success. The problem is, we are again here sitting inside of a situation where the Nash equilibrium of this game that we all play is that both sides defect. Both sides protect their data because they don't want to face the risk of data breaches or oversharing. And because of that, we live in a world where partnerships are ultimately less effective than they could be. So how do you beat the game when the Nash equilibrium is actually this double default mode? And the real answer is that you don't. You have to actually exist in a different environment. You need to change the game and change the rules and the conditions under which we operate. And the good news is that we can do that because we're not criminals. In fact, we're the exact opposite. Our goal as partnership professionals is to create value and not to destroy it. And because of that, we are sitting in a set of market conditions where there's a large universe of opportunity for us to do a better job on the collaboration side, and yet a lack of solutions that are actually enabling that work to happen. And that's when you get into a mode where there's a lot of really, really exciting opportunities for new technology to get created. And that's a technology that I want to talk about today. So first of all, the question is, why not partnerships, right? So there's all of these modes of disruptive technology that have come into the SaaS landscape. And you could almost walk your way down the org chart to identify those over the course of the last 20 years or so. Kind of starting with sales, moving into innovation that's happened in marketing, in product, certainly in customer success, even in HR and people ops. You can find these SaaS tools that have been category-defining tools that have had a massive impact on the workflows that exist for the people that are in these roles. Not just in a leadership position from a strategic reporting standpoint, but the actual end line level team members that are doing the work in these areas. They end up spending almost all their time inside of these SaaS solutions. And yet partnerships doesn't really have this. We have PRM technology, which has small innovations here and there, but ultimately is dominated by a category of software products where there hasn't been this level of disruptive change that has rolled out in the last decade or so. And that was the thing that was just kind of a head scratcher. Like, why not partnerships? And the reason largely is that partnerships until now have not been in a set of market conditions where you could realize true product market fit between the folks that are using the technology and the readiness of the actual technology landscape to support it. And what I want to do is just talk a little bit of background on the product side and the market side as to what's going on in our industry right now that is actually making these conditions possible, and then a few of the solutions that you can see out in market right now that are kind of early indicators that it's happening. So really quickly, just on the market side, the impact of SaaS in general is undeniable, and the adoption of SaaS tools within organizations is really significant. It's growing in every functional area of modern businesses, and interestingly, you don't see partnership on there because that's kind of the white whale that remains. But really, it is taking over the way in which companies operate at all scales. But the SaaS economics differ really greatly from the economics of your traditional license and maintenance model software tools of the past. Sunir's keynote actually last year was all about this, right? So Sunir talked about just the shift in the economic model around what it means to have a channel in the traditional sense in terms of partnering with other companies to drive new business and to make your products more effective. And the shift into SaaS has also shifted the way that the economics of collecting revenue work. An increased value placed on recurring revenue, on predictability of future revenue, on compounded growth, as opposed to cash up front. And that really changes the dynamics about how you think about investing through channel. It takes you from a world where dollars can be spent in mass on things like reselling, things like implementation, into a model that requires a much more recurring model around how relationships get built and maintained. And that leads to a world where there's a lot more on the technology partnership side, and relationships with compatible tools connected through APIs become all that much more important. So what this leaves us with is this really fast-growing market, but it's in the midst of a major transition where SaaS is becoming really the dominant means by which people consume technology products at this point. And that leaves us with thousands and thousands of businesses that have this shifting idea of what it means to develop their channel and what it can or should mean for the business. And out in market, for those of you that work with startups and mid-stage companies and large enterprises, this push toward technology partnerships really being the first wave of how folks think about partnerships and business development is very, very real. You talk to companies that have a vintage of 10, 20 plus years ago, they think of channel and they think of resellers, they think of SIs, they think of the traditional concept of channel. You talk to companies that are now in the startups, mid-market, some of the larger, more emerging enterprises, and their channel is their tech ecosystem, and it is their partner program, and it ends up being a revenue-driving channel, but it came from a very different place, and that unlocks a different dynamic of how to work with partners in the market. So that leads to kind of the product side of product market fit, like what's actually possible out there if we have a market that's in flux where a new set of products could be brought to market. So this is all about the rise of the API economy. So this is another just undeniable fact in that the number of businesses out there that have data connectivity that is a few clicks away through a standardized set of authentication or even abstractly through ETL providers or other means of pulling data out. These APIs are just shifting the nature of business development and doubling down here on the fact that these tech partnerships are really certainly, if not the largest yet by revenue, they are certainly the most prolific in terms of the forms of alliances that are getting developed day to day now out in the market. And what's happening then is that you just end up with all of these tailwinds where you have these ecosystem dynamics that are really, really attractive for businesses. The barriers to entry in creating new tech partnerships are lower than ever. And then all these product and tech developments where data portability, data warehousing, the ability to standardize the way that data is structured from company to company just makes it easier and easier to actually combine, compare, and think about data as one giant holistic set among your ecosystem as opposed to just yours as a business. So again, you end up in a situation where we're in the midst of change, in the midst of opportunity, but this is where we get stuck. And this is where there are challenges that create these big questions around what the next wave of innovation needs to be. Because we need to automate workflows with our partners, but we don't have visibility into their data and operations. We really want to attribute revenue to tech partner influence and kind of the activity that's going on in the channel, but we really don't have all the visibility we need to know precisely where things originated from. And we really mostly want to make sure that the opportunity costs are not so high or that we don't have false positives in a world where picking the right bets and collaborating more closely is more important than ever. So this is where the fit actually comes into play. We've got this shifting dynamics in the market. We've got this wave of technology that's fundamentally changing. And at the center, we're actually in this moment now where a market is there and existing and really yearning for change. And we finally have the underlying technology and products that can enable that change. And partnerships come last for a reason. Because when you think about that API economy and you think about the developments that have come that we've talked about thus far, partnerships are extremely unique in that they are designed to be a force multiplier for all these other areas of the business. Partnerships are special because their inputs are actually inputs that are not coming from their own self-contained silos, but in fact, they're inputs that are coming in from other areas of the business, not just at their company, but at their partners' companies as well. Partnerships had to be last. Partnerships could not have been first because it required these systems becoming used and adopted at large scale across not just each company, but each company's partners and most important partners. And only in that moment could we unlock the ability to build this tool because it's going to be dependent upon this prolific adoption of SaaS tools across all other areas of the business. And that's really the number one thing that leads to this moment because the world is ready at this point because of the readiness and the maturity of that API economy. And it takes us from a world where partner technology historically has been defined by PRM, partner relationship management, and systems built around managing contacts, taking notes, registering leads, managing content distribution, and some lightweight marketing automation, into a world that we could think of more as partner success, where we're thinking about this in a more strategic way, and we start to talk about really powerful strategic things like data collaboration, getting partner reps at multiple companies into the same workflows that are connected to one another, and being able to actually and accurately attribute revenue influence back to partner programs in a way that is actually reliable and consistent and auditable from company to company. And then, of course, eliminating those false positives, making sure that opportunity cost is not too high, and picking the right partners. It sounds like a pipe dream, but there are technology tools that are emerging in the market right now that I think are starting to really hint at this. And I wanted to walk through a couple of them. So. And by the way, outside of Crossbeam, I have no real association with any of these things I'm talking about. Slack Fund is an investor in Crossbeam, but as I go through these, it's more meant as kind of this like signal that we're seeing out in the market. This is an easy one, and it's one that everybody here is probably using in some capacity, which is shared Slack channels. It sounds really, really simple, right? And the data that is shared there is obviously free-form text in most cases. It's not a case where you've got this massive structured data going through, but it is this really interesting thing to think about for a moment, which is taking Slack from being a tool that is used very much in a siloed environment inside of an organization and starting to actually draw a network graph between companies. And if you look at just the companies where I've been involved either as an investor or as a founder, and you look at where shared Slack channels are actually being used, the most consistent and widely used ones in the environments that I've seen have been in the partnership context, in actually starting to create a line of communication between my partnership team and yours, for doing things as simple as account mapping, like which rep is working with this deal because they mentioned they're working with you, or doing things that are actually obviating and taking over some of this old PRM functionality. I've been at multiple companies with fairly large-sized partner programs where things like the marketing automation function or the content management function are actually taken over by shared Slack channels, where the latest one sheet is pinned in the channel, and any updates that are coming out are actually going through there rather than email or traditional marketing automation. So this is a thing that doesn't feel like it's necessarily designed to be partner tech, but the emergence of all of this streamlining of tools is causing people to use it in a way that starts to actually break down this previous generation of solutions that were in PRM. When you, and they're shared Slack channels, super valuable. So you take it to the next stage, and you think about companies like Snowflake. Snowflake is a data warehousing platform, competes with the likes of Amazon Redshift and Google BigQuery and others, and has just absolutely come onto the scene and become extremely dominant, particularly in kind of the high-growth software as a service segment. And if you look at their long-term view on the market, one of the things that you can see them investing in really heavily, even though it doesn't necessarily feel like the core central piece of their product, is this concept of data sharehouse or data sharing. And you can go to their website and kind of find this. And if you look at where it fits into the strategic puzzle, it's actually a really big deal for Snowflake, which is an increasingly important company kind of in the data infrastructure world. And the idea here is so simple. I have a database that contains all of my customer data, and so do you. What if we could allow each other to just query those databases directly and put very specific constraints on what we can see and when we can see it and the means by which we do it? But what we do in that case is basically obviate the need for the API in the first place. This standardized language of communication between different systems gets cut out because it is way more efficient to actually be directly hitting the data warehouse and structuring those queries such that when you need to manipulate the data, consolidate the data, order it in a certain way, let the warehouse do that work rather than getting a giant data dump from an API and actually having that data need to be worked on your side. This is a major step of progress, and the adoption that they're seeing with this is really interesting and impressive, where you've got any two companies that are collaborating and using this data sharehouse functionality, both don't even need to be on Snowflake. You can just get a portal in, and it's cutting out some of that friction that exists in the API, lowering the barrier to collaboration, and creating a use case where you can actually create brand new data products. You can develop way more robust integrations, and it's all powered by kind of bringing this to the forefront. And this again is a thing where you've got a product that's out on the market that is successful and growing, and the demand for innovation in this area creates a use case that would probably not even have been imagined or thought to be efficient just a few years ago. This is a great example of where that product and market fit is just really starting to overlap. The data sharehouse tool is super cool. I think they're just calling it data sharing now, although I love the data sharehouse name. So the last thing, which what good would a presentation be if I didn't plug my own product? Apologies in advance for that aspect of it, but I do think there's some aspects of Crossbeam that become kind of interesting to just put in the framework of these other products, which is, if you're not familiar with Crossbeam, we're effectively an escrow service for data. So we allow companies to find overlaps in their data without needing to actually share the entire data set with each other. So it can be shockingly hard to answer these questions like, how many customers do we have in common and who are they? Or are my sales reps selling to any of the same people that your sales reps are selling to at the same time? And the concept of Crossbeam is really, if you could put a technology layer in between those companies that are partnered with each other, you could actually allow them to answer those questions without encountering the data risk that would normally come with just giving full-on access to a CRM system or sharing a customer list, which frankly is a non-starter for the vast majority of companies. So you end up in a situation where you can actually run these comparisons in the cloud, get the results out, and route them back into your workflows in a way that lets your sales reps get connected with the counterpart reps at other companies, in a way that lets you stack rank your partner ecosystem to understand where the largest overlaps are, and in ways that allow you to qualify leads and get basically intelligence from your partner universe back into your frame of reference so that you know who to spend energy on and how to position your products in the context of your partners. So these things, when you add them all up and you look at the adoption curve, the reality is that we're definitely still in the early parts of this curve, but I think we're past the point now where we're in enthusiast mode, where there's a few folks that are kind of the cowboys out at the front of adoption and hacking together products to make things work. And we're now at a part where there are actually multiple products out in market that are changing the way people think about the technology that actually enables collaboration in the context of partnerships. And I would say that these three examples that I gave, and I'm sure there are many more to come, all fall under this category much more of partner success than they do of the traditional PRM model. My expectation is that over the course of the next several years, we see an entire category built up and around this partner success dynamic as we start to move into it being not just a visionary thing to use these tools, but an extremely pragmatic one. And because all of the underlying technology required to actually facilitate this is there, the rate at which the adoption can happen is extremely rapid, much more rapid than what was required for these big shifts to happen in sales, in marketing, and in other areas. That's the story for today. That is a giant version of my head right next to my actual head. And yeah, if you want to chat about any of this stuff, I am always game to geek out about partner tech, whether it's Crossbeam or not. There's my contact info, and I think we left 2 or 3 minutes for any questions. But thank you.
You were very efficient.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm going to stand here and awkwardly look people in the eye until somebody asks me a question.
No, you should. Does anyone? Okay, I'm going down the back.
All right.
Oh, we have a mic runner. Oh, wait, great. I'll keep standing right up here. Out of the, whoa. It just blows me.
Yes, sir. We've got a mic right behind you there.
With that shameless plug you did on your own company, can you talk a little bit about how it works? So
Sure.
I understand the concept of escrow between two companies, sharing lists, but
Sure.
Can you kind of talk very quickly about the process, how it works between two companies?
Of course, yeah. So the mechanics are relatively simple. We typically are connecting into whatever the system of record is for your sales process and your customer base. So typically that's a CRM system. We've got connectors to the vast majority of them. We do have APIs and the ability to upload files as well, but always better to connect the system of record so we can continuously update it. And then once that data is connected, obviously everybody's got their own dirty data problems and other things that make it not the easiest in the world to just slam two data sets together and look for results. So we have this step in onboarding called population creation, where you take that raw data and you refine it down into these very specific subsets of your data that typically map to funnel stages. So even if your Salesforce implementation is a mess, chances are that your sales team cares a lot about what's closing this quarter and how easily they can predict that. And because of that, there's typically really refined metadata around funnel stages, around the status of opportunities, et cetera, that at least ephemerally is accurate. It's accurate this quarter for what's going on this quarter and probably a little into the future. And it's certainly accurate for who's a customer and who's not, because your entire customer success team probably uses that. So we take advantage of that and let you basically replicate those things in the Crossbeam environment. And then I've done it and my partners have done it. And that allows Crossbeam to make a more apples-to-apples comparison between your population and mine, even if we came from different CRM systems, even if you uploaded a file and I connected Salesforce. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Given that slide change, I think we might be at time.
Well, we've got 3 minutes.
All right, 3 minutes, more awkward staring. Who's ready?
I have a question for you, though.
Yes.
You had mentioned, so your last slide was talking about looking forward and looking at kind of like the solutions network effects. And in one of your previous slides before, you'd said that partnerships kind of had to come at like the tail end of everything that was happening before.
Right.
So I guess my question is, do you think the partnerships can come first? And if so, what do you think needs to happen to make that happen? Or can it just not happen the way that partnerships actually work and run?
Yeah, so I think there's partnerships in a lot of ways are the tip of the spear in certain areas of the business. I think where they come last in this context is just in the technology stack and being able to have all of the relevant pieces of data in the right places. Like, because there's not a real great standardized system of record for partnership tools, and because when partnership platforms and organizations are extremely successful, the output is that they actually become a force multiplier for sales and a force multiplier for marketing, and in a lot of cases, a force multiplier for product. It requires that the inputs and the outputs, which are data from sales, marketing, and product, are already completely done. And by definition there, I don't know that there's anything you can really do about it. But that's from a tech and data standpoint. I think where partners can lead the way and actually be out the forefront is in the innovation of how that data gets used and the actual applications of how it gets put together. Because partner programs and partner managers are in this really unique position because they've got access to not just that data and insights from their own company, but they actually have a lens into the data that's going on in other companies that are in their ecosystems. A little bit before this era of partner success, but now increasingly in the coming years, I think those doorways are going to open more and more. And it's going to mean that partner programs are going to have answers and insights that just could never be put together by a sales program or a marketing program. The partners are going to actually be the portal into understanding the markets in which we operate, understanding broader market trends, and hopefully identifying areas where big investments could be made in terms of how to go to market and what those motions ought to be. And hopefully what that does is brings the percentage of revenue that's driven through whatever you want to call it, through channel that is influenced by partners, brings that back up to the levels that we used to see decades ago in the license and maintenance model, where 40–50% of revenue being impacted by channel and by partners was extremely typical at scale. I think this pathway is the way to kind of get SaaS companies into that world, and that's an enormous amount of value and an enormous amount of revenue that can come from it.
I'm sure most people in the room would love to see the 40–50% of revenue coming from partnerships in the future. So with that, would you all please help me and thank Bob Moore from Crossbeam?
Cool, thank you for coming. Thanks.